know if you remember, we actually hung out at a bar, some random bar, super late at night, draft night. Everybody had bogeyman hats on.
Yeah.
And it was a late, long night to go from that to the number one pick in the NBA. Did you know that the Bucks were taking you number one?
No, they wouldn't tell me. So they wanted to keep the element of surprise. So we kind of asked. We were grilling them. The agent was a little bit, but they wouldn't show us their hand.
What's that like?
It was amazing. Go through that whole process.
Does it feel like it was 16 years ago? 16 years ago.
It feels like a long time ago. But when you're in the midst of your NBA career, that goes quick. But yeah, just that draft process, having my family there. And like I said, just the journey that I had to take from a young fella to go the biggest stage and go number one. Like, for me, playing like NBL basketball, playing professionally in Australia, if you would have told me at 12, 13, like someone's going to pay you and give you money to play basketball, done. Where do I sign? I never thought the NBA it was a fantasy. It was that fantasy TV show that you just knew, like, I'm never going to get there, but it'd be nice to get there. And then I got there and it was like, wow, like I'm actually here. Okay.
So you get there. When you got there, your first Bucks team was a weird mix, right? You had like TJ Ford was young point guard. Right?
Yep.
But then you had some old guys. You had like Tony Kukoc on your team as well.
Yeah.
How were the old guys to you?
They also had Irvin Johnson. So they basically brought Irvin Johnson back for a season, basically to mentor me. And he was awesome to me. Like he was basically, his role was like, take care of Bogues. So he'd sit on the bus near me when we go on road trips and give me the scouting report going into the arenas, even after we land, get to Minnesota. Hey, look, Andy does this. Garnett's going to do this. So he was a really good mentor for me. Tony Kukoc was an idol of mine as a kid. So it was kind of surreal to be, my rookie year was his last year. But Tony was kind of burnt out at that point. He was kind of to an extent, an angry veteran where he'd been through all the bullshit of the NBA and was kind of like on a knife's edge to just snapping every day. But he was good fun, though. I mean, as long as Tony got his 18 holes of golf in, he was good. So then we had Michael Redd, obviously. Desmond Mason was there. So the roster was kind of all over the place, trying to piece it together. But it was an interesting transition for me.
Now, was there a moment like a welcome to the NBA? Like, I think your first game was against Chris Webber, right? Like your first NBA game was Allen Iverson.
Yeah,
I'm looking at Allen Iverson, Chris Webber. By the way, they had Andre Iguodala, Kyle Korver, Chris Webber, Allen Iverson in their starting lineup. Do you remember that game at all?
Yeah, I do. I remember we stole that game at the end. I don't think we were pretty close the whole game, and then won that one, and then I think we went to New Jersey and won another close one. But yeah, I mean, it was just surreal. I mean, I was a big Sacramento Kings fan today when they had, that beautiful ball movement back in the early 2000s, and they were up there with almost beating the Lakers. So I knew, C. Webb. I watched a lot of his games, and it was kind of surreal just to be out there and competing with those guys and actually having a good game to open up my rookie campaign.
It's interesting. Here's how I felt like when I played in Europe, when I've seen Aussies play, is that I think there's a respect for American basketball. Like, look, we respect how good those dudes are, but not you personally, but they don't love how Americans play, right? In that I always feel like the Aussies feel like they're a little bit tougher. They're more about team. And it's definitely five playing as one. Whereas kind of the American, especially the NBA basketball, it's end of shot clock. Hey, I'm just better than you. I'm going to jump up and make a shot. And so there's like a respect, but maybe not. Is that accurate, or am I just sensing that especially like I don't think the Spaniards, the Lithuanians, the Italians, like I don't think they like American style basketball, especially the NBA and maybe the persona of it. As an Australian who's played for the national teams and played in the NBA, is that a fair sense of how our game or the NBA style of game is viewed?
Yeah, to an extent. Look, we as a national team, just speaking for Australia, we know we're not going to out-talent the US. Like, it's just not going to happen. Most countries aren't going to out-talent them. So we have to rely on being together, having a good culture, moving the ball, playing the right way, setting good screens, all those small things that we generally know the US team won't do. Because at the end of the day, like you said, the US can just throw it to Kevin Durant or Steph Curry and be like, get us a bucket. You know, we don't have that luxury. We have to be clinical with our execution. We have to box out. We have to get rebounds. We can't turn the ball over. So, yeah, there is an argument to that, but that's why the US is so hard to beat. They can have a horrible game and still beat you just based on talent. But as far as basketball purity, you obviously, for me personally, I like to watch the teams that move the ball and where everyone's involved. I'm not a huge fan of isolation basketball from a viewing perspective. I like to see, you know, sneaky sets, you know, hitters, good ball movement, you know, that kind of stuff. It is nice to see a guy like, you know, when Klay Thompson dropped 35 that just gets hot. That's great. Fantastic. But as far as just some guy dribbling 15, 20 times to get a shot up, I don't enjoy watching that. Some people do. I don't.
No, I don't either. It's like I say this about James Harden all the time. He's a great basketball player. And I think he's better with Brooklyn. And fantastic basketball player. I can't stand to watch him play. And I'm in no way indicting his talent. It's the way in which his talent was used, especially in Houston.
Oh, no doubt. And I totally agree. It's just not – and that's the way the game's going. It's become an ISO game, and it's become, you know, if we shoot more threes than you, we're probably going to have a better chance of winning. And at times it's hard to watch, and that's might be the old man in me now. I'm that old cynical former athlete that now is, you know, it's not a case of shitty on the younger generation. I think each generation gets better than the previous one, but it's just the way the game is now. It's just not as fun to watch.
Okay, so you were in Milwaukee for like 7 years, right? Did you know that they were thinking about moving?
No. So they I asked to be moved. So 2000 and I'd gone through that injury run, kind of just got out of it. Walkout year, 2011-12, I come back. I asked, you know, the thing with Milwaukee was we were a revolving door for so many years. Like every year I'd come back and we'd have 8 or 9 or 10 new faces, new players. And I'm like, how are we going to build something? How are we going to build a culture? How are we going to build continuity? Like when you have that many new faces, it's just not going to work. We need to, you know, we're a small market team. We can't just go and sign free agents, you know, and make trades and try to hit home runs. And they kept trying to do that. And I went in and just said, look, I think, you know, I've played out what I can here. I think it's time to move on for both of us. And they said, no, we're not moving you. We're not going to get equal value back for a good center in the NBA. You know, you're still very valuable to us. And I think that was, you know, I led the league in blocks the season before. I was really coming to my own defensively, and they just said no. And then 2 weeks later, Kyle Lowry shoots a floater, tries to chase his own floater down, undercuts me. I break my ankle and was then out for the rest of the season. GM was in the hot seat at the time. Coach was in the hot seat at the time. They had to make a playoff push. And they thought, well, shit, Bogut isn't going to play for the rest of the season. If we can get some value back, we'll move him. And I got traded for Monta Ellis, who then helped them get the 8th seed in the playoffs. And I went to Golden State.
I'm sure you know this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway because Chris Mullin told me this to be true, is that they told Milwaukee, you can have Steph or Monta, you pick. And they picked Monta. That's the story.
I know the story personally because the person who looked over the medical files, I had a good relationship with and was told the exact same thing. The person that was involved in looking over him, her role or their role was to strictly look at the medicals. That was the only opinion the club asked for them. That the club would do the talent evaluation. They just said, look at these 2 medicals and tell us which one's better. And there was huge concerns over his ankle at that point. And he got the mark on his name saying this guy's got his injury history is worse and could potentially play less games than Monta, and they went Monta. So I'm 99%.
Which is crazy. It's crazy on 2 levels. First on the Bucks, right, but also for the Warriors, right? Because the Warriors are like, look, you have and what he's become. It's really, I get roasted because when he left college, I didn't see it because he was so slight. And I was like, I know how much fun he is to play. And when he first left, he'd only played point for a year. I was like, man, I don't know how he guards anybody. He's so slight. But I also came from the generation when I was playing professional basketball, so much more physical. Obviously, the officiating changed. But so I get crushed because of who he's become. Like, I thought he'd be Hornacek. That's who I thought he'd be. Yeah. That was my comp. Play both positions, really shoot, but the ceiling there. And obviously he's become – when you got there, so you get there, camp, are you healthy in camp?
No. So my ankle, a lot of people don't know, I ended up having a microfracture on that surgery, which I didn't know going into surgery. It was kind of done on the whim because I didn't know how bad it was. And so I get traded there with all this hoopla and attention. The Warriors have finally got a big man, blah, 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 blah. So I'm feeling that, and I'm like, man, I want to be out on the court. Like, they've invested in me. So I broke my ankle in January. I made training camp in September. Stupidly, should have been out 9 or 12 months back in September, and like got to the fourth game, made the fourth game of the season, and my ankle just it would literally be the size of a balloon after a training session or a game. So I had to shut it down till February, and then came back and was basically taking injections and painkillers just to get through the rest of that season. We made the playoffs. That was that year we beat Denver and took San Antonio to 6. But yeah, I wouldn't say I was entirely healthy, which was frustrating.
What did you think of Steph at that point? Like, what do you remember your initial impressions of?
Just the way he shot the ball was unbelievable. I'd be lying to say that I'd ever say he'd be the 2-time MVP. I think, there's not many people that thought that. Even if you look back at that trade, Warriors fans essentially didn't think that. Like, no matter what they say now, there were Warriors fans that loved Monta and would probably have preferred to keep him back then over Steph, And the beauty of that trade wasn't necessarily just the Monta for me. It was freeing up Steph to be that guy and have the ball in his hands. The knock on Monta was back then, he was fantastic for the Warriors, but he was a huge stats guy. And he was somewhat competing with Steph at times about whose team is this. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. And I think that Warriors move ended up being genius. Even if Monta was traded for a water cooler, it freed up Steph to be who he was and show that he could lead that team.
But I would tell you this, okay? So here's the underrated part about you. And this is the part which I feel like non-basketball people, or maybe even what I do in broadcasting, we make everything very kind of linear for people to understand. But it's that you are a great passer. Draymond's a great passer. You look at some of those bench guys that were added as well that were, actually, like end up being point guards, really. When he became – one of the reasons he was able to become who he became, Sean Livingston, former point guard, right, is, yes, technically Steph, I guess, is a point guard, but he's equally, if not more dangerous off the basketball as he is with the basketball. But the only way that works is if other guys can get it to him and can move it. And yes, freeing up Steph to handle the ball more helped, but he also essentially brought in a point center, right? You were such a great passer and a great screener, legal or illegal, whatever. Like those two things, I think, and I want to get to the Cavs series because when you got hurt, but those two things I think forever go underrated in what helped him go from where he was to where he is now. Is that fair?
I think so. I think, the first thing started with Monta, who was a guy that would go ISO a lot. So I took that portion away from the team and what was going on. But Steph's, in my estimation, I don't have a better 1-2 man moving off the ball in NBA history, in my books. I think he's phenomenal moving off the basketball and creating opportunities for guys to slip just from his movement off the ball and his willingness to move off the ball. There's not many superstars in the league you can go up to and say, we're going to put you off the ball for 8 minutes this quarter. They're going to lose their shit. Let me get in my bag. I can just break him down with the ball one-on-one, where Steph will happily do that. And, having the pieces around, Draymond, myself, guys that can screen and get him open, guys that can read off that screen, Andre Iguodala who can pass as well as myself or Draymond. Everyone knew how to handle the ball. Everyone knew how to move the ball. And everyone just knew how to play basketball. And it just ended up being natural and in sync. A lot of our offense wasn't called by Steve Kerr. It was It was 90% of it was just in the natural flow of read and react basketball, which you can't just do with any roster. You can't. We had that roster of guys. I spoke about it at length a few weeks ago on the Rogue Bows. I said, like, Andre Iguodala would lose his shit when we had guys that weren't high IQ players because they couldn't fit in with that flow, and they just stick out like a sore thumb because you could just tell they didn't know how to read and react. They needed a coach to say, run from point A to point B, something very regimented, and he'd just basically go to the coaches and GMs and go, get this guy out of here. You can't play here. And it made total sense.
Draymond. You first meet Draymond. What was your first impression of this dude?
Well, he was kind of a little bit different than he is today because he was a second-round pick.
I know. He's fat.
Was kind of, he was a little overweight. He wasn't as – he had an intensity about him. He wasn't as vocal as he is today. He will be the first to tell you, and he's been on record saying this, that if Mark Jackson was still the coach, he'd probably be playing in Europe right now. And he based that on that Mark was trying to play him at the 3 because he was only 6'6", and Draymond's not a 3-man, So once Steve, even Mark later on, the end of his tenure, figured out you can play him at the 4, and then Steve even went more extremes and said he would play at the 5. It opened up his game perfectly because he's a guy that plays way bigger than his size. His wingspan's huge, but to see Draymond's growth has been fantastic, and he's the epitome of a guy that could have been potentially out of the league, just not taking no for an answer, and then becoming an all-star and a guy that's invaluable for his team.
Did you like him right away?
I got along with him. Yeah, look, Draymond and I butted heads. He's butted heads with everyone in the organization, from the coaches to people that put the popcorn in the bags. That's just Draymond, right? He's an intense character, and it's ever rarely personal. And I've gotten into it with him numerous times, but we were poker buddies. We hung out a lot, and he was fun to be around. But, some days you wouldn't talk to him for a day because you get into it and you leave it. But the next day it's over with and you get on with life. And that was the beauty of that team. We had a lot of those scuffles throughout the seasons, on court, during games, during practices. But we knew the next day it is what it is. Let's move on.
Outside of playing Draymond at the 4 and at the 5, what else about Steve Kerr changed everything?
He didn't come in and change a lot, to be honest with you. He left our defense as it was. Ron Adams tweaked a few small things, but his whole thing was turnovers. I don't know what we were. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we were top 10 turnovers before Steve came in, probably even top 5. He said, if we can get that down, just 5 turnovers or 4 turnovers, we're going to win a championship. And we did, and he was big on just looking after the ball. They charted passes per possession. So I think 4 or more passes that first season we shot in the 50s or the high 50s, 60% with 4 or more passes in the possession. And when it was 2 or less, it was high 30s, low 40s. So they charted things like that. Movement, don't turn it over. You guys win a championship. Do everything else the same. And he was really big on that, to the extremes of opening training camp was high school type training camp. Dribbling balls through cones, passing the ball through a toss-back net. All right, we're doing chest passes. Now we're doing – and Draymond was like, what the position? We're not in high school anymore. Losing it during training camp. But the method of the madness that Steve implemented, I understood, because he was like, I'm planting in your brains. If you guys need to be treated like high school kids to make sure you guys are making fundamental plays, we're going to do these stupid drills. We have a game where we turn it over 20 times. Guess how we started practice that next day, doing all that bullshit. So then we guys were like, if we don't want to do this anymore, let's make sure we're fundamental, and we were.